Okay, let's get into this, you guys. As I said off the top in the intro, we are without Robert Mays. He is on a well-deserved vacation, so we're going to be doing this without our fearless leader, but I think we can handle it. First off, joining me, the usual co-host of the Athletic Football Show, it is Derrik Klassen. Derrik, what's going on, man?
I'm doing good. I've gotten used to the 3-person show that we've been doing on the mailbags, but now we have a different 3-person show. So it's, we're in the middle of the off season, so we're throwing things for a loop, but I'm excited for this one.
This is what we do. This is what everyone does on May 28th when we are recording this. Turn on any of your favorite NFL programs. You're probably going to see a guest or two mixed in, and so that's what we've got here today on the Athletic Football Show. This voice, however, familiar to TAPS listeners. It is Mike Sando. Sando, thanks for being with us today, man. How you doing?
It's great to be here. You know what they say, if you have 3 hosts, you have no hosts, right? But I think we're doing well. Beller, you're doing a great job. Good to be back on the show. Hope Robert's getting some sun somewhere, probably some good restaurants in there. The rest of us, working stiffs, just keep plugging along.
Hey, some of the teams that we're going to be talking about in this episode, they're dealing with 2, they're dealing with 3, they're dealing with 4. Hopefully for them, they find at least one guy who they can settle on, feel good about, whatever the case might be, being where they are in their team builds. As I said in the intro, we are talking quarterback battles, the legitimate quarterback battles that we have in the NFL this season. We're going to roll through them, and we're going to ask basically 2 questions for most of these teams. There's going to be a little bit of difference for some of them, but for most of them, we're thinking, who's the starter in week 1 and who is the starter after Thanksgiving? I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to let Derrik and Sando do the heavy lifting here, but I'm going to pose the questions, and we'll go through all these teams. We'll hit a few other interesting quarterback situations at the end of the show after we get through the real quarterback battles. So, guys, let's get rolling. Let's get with the one that is the truest quarterback battle that we have in the NFL, not only this season, but one of the truest that I remember in recent years. It is the Colts. It is Anthony Richardson versus Daniel Jones. Sando, you are the pure guest here, so we're going to start with you.
Yeah.
Who do you like as the week 1 starter here, and then how likely do you think it is that that person remains the starter after Thanksgiving?
I think it's Daniel Jones. I think he'll win the battle. I just don't see how Anthony Richardson suddenly becomes viable as an option. The idea of Anthony Richardson is fun. Big athletic guy you try to develop over time. They're running out of time. And sadly, their owner passed away too. So you don't know what you already sort of felt like, hey, they've got to patch this together and try to get a playoff berth or be a competent team. We like Shane Steichen, but Anthony Richardson completing, 40-some% of his passes, doesn't really understand the position. I don't think he's not a bad guy or anything like that. But when he left the game against Houston, you can't do that. Like he just doesn't understand everything that comes with the position. So I think Daniel Jones understands that stuff better, is a very poor man's Richardson in terms of he can move around a little bit. But I think there's going to be a consistency with him in camp, certainly a lower ceiling, but that's going to appeal to them to want to run their offense. So I would say pretty strongly he's going to win it. Now, the last couple of years, he hasn't started more than half the season. So I think there is a decent chance that through injury, through the team being out of it, needing to look at Richardson at some point, that he could. I think Richardson's going to play at some point this year. So I may lean a little bit towards late in the season for whatever reason, poor performance, injury, the season's gotten away from them. We need to look at Richardson. I could see that happening.
I think it's kind of funny you mentioned the comparison between the two because they really do have a lot of similarities in a lot of ways. Neither of them are really that accurate. Obviously, it's more of an issue with Richardson, but I would even say for Jones, that's one of the weaker parts of his game. They're both prone to throwing the ball to the other team a little bit, and they're both actually really good athletes. If we remember in 2022 or 2023, that really good Giants season where he was doing a lot of boot stuff, some of the RPOs with the Giants. So they both are really good athletes. So maybe that's one of the nice things to be in Steichen's position. I don't think this is an enviable position in general, but I do think there's a lot of overlap in terms that you would want to use both of these quarterbacks. I would imagine that the difference is probably just Jones is a little bit more comfortable with the RPO throws that they want to make, especially I think outside of the numbers. So maybe that pushes them a little bit more towards Jones being the guy. And I do think Jones is probably a little bit more comfortable handling some of the pre-snap stuff just because, again, he's done it before. He's been around in the league for a long time. And the Colts also, it's important to note, are moved on from Ryan Kelly this offseason, who he was able to do a lot of that stuff previously for the last, 7 quarterbacks or however many it is that they've had over the last handful of years. Whereas now I think they're starting Tanner Bortolini at center, who I think promising young player, but probably not as capable of handling all the mental stuff. So I could see that pushing them towards Jones, but I just feel like when you draft the quarterback this high, you got to give him at least one more chance, especially since it is the same coaching staff. If it was a different coaching staff, I might think a little bit differently, but I imagine we'll get Anthony Richardson week 1 starter. The Thanksgiving cutoff is where I think it starts to get a little bit icky. Like if they're, 5-7 by that point, because I think that it's like around week 12, 13, then I would be kind of surprised if we still have Richardson in the lineup.
It's interesting. They have a week 11 bye and then visit the Chiefs on November 23rd. So I don't know if that's the time to put in a new a quarterback, but that is when their bye is. So you could kind of see maybe, at that time of the year, we're talking Thanksgiving. That's right around Thanksgiving week.
I actually kind of like that cutoff because not in terms of putting in a new starter, but just in terms of, in my mind, the way I would want to handle this is to really give Richardson one last good opportunity, because winning 9 games doesn't really do anything for you as the Colts, in my opinion. And so I would want to give Richardson the run. And so I actually think the bye week is nice because even if it's not going all that well for the first 8 to 10 weeks, you get him the bye week, and then you have 2 games against really good teams. They have the Chiefs, and then I think right after that they have the Texans. If it's like, okay, you get the bye week and then you have those 2 games and you still can't contend against the good teams, then I'm fine pulling the plug. But I would at least try to give him every opportunity to succeed until then.
All right, Sando, so let's say you're right. Daniel Jones ends up starting week 1 for the Colts. Even if Anthony Richardson ends up starting at some point this season, if they deem Daniel Jones a training camp quarterback battle winner over Anthony Richardson, that might be the end of the line for Richardson in Indy. So where does he go from here? Obviously, we'd be talking about just the 4th year of his rookie contract in 2026, but what would be next for him in your mind if he does get beat out by Daniel Jones in a city that was willing to make him the 4th overall pick in the draft just a couple of years ago?
Yeah, you would think somebody who wants to have a run-based offense may give him a look. Is there, I've always thought like an Andy Reid is the salvager of quarterbacks. I just don't know in this case. I think that Anthony Richardson hasn't shown that he's ready to be a quarterback yet and lead a team. So does he fit in with somebody who has, a Greg Roman type of a guy as a backup? Is he, Seattle's could be heading that direction in the future. Obviously Baltimore's there a little bit. They signed Cooper Rush, so maybe it's a down the road type of a thing. But I just don't necessarily see a lot of people wanting to. I think he was a major reach in the draft, and I'm just not sure there's a lot of. I know there's not a lot of optimism for him because I talked to a lot of people in the league.
I know Howie Roseman. He's just based on the talent, seems like a swing that they would like to take. Plus, they just always like taking in quarterbacks anyway, regardless of where they've come from.
That's a great one. Yeah,
I mean,
that one.
If they were willing to do it with like Kenny Pickett, right? I'm sure they would spend a 1 year on Anthony Richardson, just see if they can garner up some optimism and flip him for a 4th round, 5th round pick, whatever it is. So that one could make sense to me. But I do think it's interesting because I think in my mind, when I think of like uber talented quarterback who didn't turn out to be what we wanted, it's either Justin Fields or like Trey Lance. But I think kind of the difference there is Fields is more accurate than either of those guys. But also kind of to your point of Richardson maybe not getting the position yet and just maybe there's some other struggles. It seems like everybody in the world loves being around Justin Fields. And I do think that if you're in a quarterback in this position, that's a helpful thing. And I think that's part of the differentiating factors here.
Yeah, you mentioned Trey Lance. That's not you don't want to be compared to him,
No.
but the market for him was nothing. He didn't play as much. And Anthony Richardson has shown some things. I look at, Green Bay signed Malik Willis as their backup. So, is that the type of place where you could get somebody in there and it's a totally different offense when he goes in. But your coach has shown an ability to do that at least on a backup basis, a short-term basis.
Last thing here for the sake of being comprehensive on the Colts. Derrik, can we make anything of this team using a 6th round pick on Riley Leonard?
If only for, again, I think it actually plays into the fact that, like, if Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones have some degree of overlap in terms of their physical skill sets and some of the throws they want to make, I think Riley Leonard is actually in the same bucket. He, to me, is like, when I watched him, I was like, oh, that's like if Daniel Jones just didn't throw the ball at the other team. And so I think there's something to that in terms of just playable guy, but I'd be shocked if he got much time this year.
All right, guys, let's move on to the New York Giants here. Now, this one feels like maybe the cleanest battle that we're used to seeing in the NFL, where veteran X ends up as the starter early in the season, knowing that they are eventually turning the job over to rookie first-round pick Y at some point. But things happen in training camp. Things happen during the season. We saw this play out a little bit with Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy, pre-McCarthy injury last year, where we weren't exactly sure if and when Darnold could be turning the job over to Minnesota. So as clean as it might seem, maybe it doesn't go that way. Derrik, we're going to go to you with this one first. The New York Giants, Russell Wilson and Jackson Dart, week 1 starter, post-Thanksgiving starter. What are you looking at here?
So I think, like you said, it's definitely going to be Russell Wilson. He was brought in to obviously be the week 1 guy. And then I think we all knew, even if you were an optimistic Dart person heading into the draft, I think we all knew that he was probably going to be a guy who was going to take time, and that's fine. I think what complicates, like, when is he going to go in is, have you guys seen the Giants schedule? I was posting
only after I saw you talking about it today.
I was posting about this right before we went on to recording because I hadn't looked at many team schedules yet. It is a murderer's row. Before week 12, which is like kind of our Thanksgiving cutoff, they have 4 division games, which that's a tough division, and they get Philly twice in that span. They get the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Broncos, the 49ers, and the entire NFC North outside of the Vikings. The only other game on there that I didn't mention was they get the Saints.
They get the Vikings late in the year, too.
Yeah, right, and they get the Vikings eventually later in the year, so it's like, they start the season with like 11 losses basically, and so it's one of those things where I wonder, like, I know we all want to say like, oh, they'll get to the bye week and then they'll put the new guy in, but I feel like after week 4 or 5 when they're really scrambling, I feel like he's just going to get thrown into the fire. So I think it's going to be Dart by Thanksgiving, just by virtue of, like, I think this staff in this front office is, playing and fighting for their job, and at a certain point, you just get desperate and you throw the young guy in.
Now, they have Jameis Winston on the roster, too.
That's also true.
We'll see if that stays. But, is he a plan? Do they make this a 3-tier thing where, hey, Wilson sort of gets moved on from, at a certain point, they go a few games with Winston and then try to put Dart in? One of the interesting things, at least to me, is I love to look at the history. So Dart, in the salary cap era since 2000. Well, I'll tell you, first off, I think Wilson starts and I think Dart will play late in the year. Okay, so I'm going to answer the question. But he is the 16th first-round quarterback taken 20th or later in the salary cap era, right? So of the other 15, only 4 were named starters as rookies. And you're going to forgive me for some of these names. Kenny Pickett, Bridgewater, Brandon Weeden, and Patrick Ramsey, okay? 7 were named starters in year 2. Lamar, Manziel, Tebow, Brady Quinn, Jason Campbell, J.P. Lossman, Rex Grossman, a lot of great names. 2 were named starters in year 4, Jordan Love and Rodgers. They had the great quarterbacks in place, though. 2 never became a starter at all, Paxton Lynch, Jim Druckenmiller. So as you look at those names, you really realize what a long shot it is to draft a quarterback at the back end of the first round and have him become anything. We're really talking about, of the guys that got long-term deals, second deals with their teams, it's Jordan Love, Lamar, and Aaron Rodgers. The other guys are Pickett.
Across the board.
There's 1,200 guys. Kenny Pickett, Paxton Lynch, Manziel, Bridgewater, Weeden, Tebow, Quinn, Campbell, Lossman, Grossman, Ramsey, Druckenmiller. That's a lot of guys who were not good quarterbacks. So the odds, I would say the odds of Jackson Dart being ready to play this year are low. The odds of him becoming a good quarterback are low. And so yet you have this regime that probably may need to play him at some point late in the year to show that he's got something, right? I think if you could build some momentum with him late in the year, maybe that buys you some time, gives you a chance. That will be a very interesting, potentially dicey thing in light of the schedule and in light of his probable lack of readiness to be good right away.
I agree with all of that, which is why I'm very scared that he's going to get thrown in a little bit too early. And you mentioned, Beller, you mentioned that those are all unique cases. The guy who's turned out well. like you said, Sando, Love and Rodgers, they got to sit behind really good quarterbacks in organizations that have been, good since we started calling it the NFL, even before we started calling it the NFL. So, like, that helps. And then the other guy is Lamar Jackson, who I know Jackson Dart has some tools. He's got a good arm. He can run. He's not Lamar Jackson, where he has some of the best tools that we've ever seen at the position. And so that's the type of guy that can get away with being a little bit more of a long shot at the position, so to speak. And so, yeah,
great
I'm
organizations
kind of with you.
Too. Great organizations with long-term plans, stability at head coach, long runways. Hey, we can bring this guy around. We not only that, we have the capabilities in Baltimore to change our whole system and let him develop as a passer, and then change it again, and he's an MVP, right? So, I think those are totally better situations with better players, better talents than Jackson Dart. So, I did like the way the Giants maneuvered and didn't take him earlier, but the likelihood of this working out is probably lower than they realize.
That's where I'm at. It makes more sense that they took him where they did instead of I don't know, either trading back from 3 or trading back up into the top 10, but I'm with you that based on where you take these guys at the back end of the first round, it's really not much of a better bet than taking a guy on day 2, truthfully.
Yeah. Sandy, you've seen this plenty of times in all your time covering the NFL. How much would you expect the motivation, the understandable motivation that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are going to enter this season with to keep their jobs, to push their decision on this if, as Derrik said, at Washington, at Dallas, versus Kansas City, versus the Chargers, at the Saints, versus the Eagles. Those are the first 6 games for this New York Giants team. Let's say they come out of that 1-5. Let's give them a win against the Saints, just for the hell of it. How much is the motivation to keep the job, push them to move to say, hey, this guy who we picked, this guy we maneuvered up smartly to pick in the back of the first round, he can be the guy here?
You've got to feel really good about him, because after those first 6 games, they play at Denver and at Philly. Shoot. Those are top 5 defenses last time I looked, right? So I think you'd really have to feel good about them to do it. Otherwise, I think you got to wait.
All right, guys, next up here is the New Orleans Saints. Now we'll go back to, about a week before the draft, the big Derek Carr news that he's going to be injured, going to be missing the entire 2025 season. Then, on top of that, the retirement of Derek Carr. So we now know that we are looking at Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler, at least as it sits right now in New Orleans. Sando, what are you looking at for this Shuck-Rattler battle? Who do you like for week 1? Who do you like later into the season?
I kind of think they turn it over to Shuck. Now, I could be wrong on that, because it's interesting. I spoke with an agent yesterday who thought the Saints starting quarterback might not even be on the roster. This is a franchise that continually tries to push, including when they reworked Derek Carr's contract earlier this offseason. They kicked the can down the road when they thought he was going to be in the mix. So everything about their history has been, we're going to push, and you're not really pushing if you're putting a rookie second-round pick in there for week 1, right? I don't think Rattler is necessarily the answer either. I think Shuck's going to get every chance. I do think at this point he would be my leader in the clubhouse to start. He is older, probably a little more mature than some young guys in there. And, to bet on him still being in the lineup late in the year, I don't necessarily see Rattler beating him out or being a better option, but man, a lot of things can happen with a guy who hasn't played much before, has never played in the NFL. And so you would have to think that Shuck's not starting 17 games, right? Something's going to happen there. He's had injury issues in the past, but I think right now I would think that all signs point to him being their guy. I would like that for them a little bit, in this sense that I feel like we've been waiting for them to reset a little bit. And even if they have to take their lumps, right? I liked them this year. They had extra draft picks in the 3rd and 4th rounds. It sort of looked like more of a long-term build, but I think the Saints still have to prove that they have that in their DNA, and they're not going to do something else.
Right. Like, one half of an offseason where they're a little bit patient doesn't necessarily overwrite the decades long of doing what they've done. So, but I think I'm with you on the quarterback competition. I'm still holding out some hope for Spencer Rattler, not to be like some great quarterback, but I do think that there were flashes last year where he did some really good stuff, and I think his arm is amazing. He's just one of those guys who's a little bit more aggressive than he should and thinks he's a better athlete than he is, and so he can run himself into some trouble. And I think that does make for an interesting quarterback contrast between Tyler Shuck, who I think is really talented. His arm is awesome. He's a pretty good athlete, but he's not like as creative or aggressive as I think a guy like Rattler is. He's a little bit more, 1, 2, 3, get to the top of my drop. all right, we're checking the ball down if it's not there. And I think early in camp, I think we're going to see some real competition, and I think we'll probably see some flashes from Rattler, maybe even the preseason, where it looks like he could be more exciting. But I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, Kellen Moore is going to want to start Tyler Shuck for more games than not. And so, like you said, maybe there's a couple injury games, here and there where he misses. But I think if I were to set the, over under on Tyler Shuck starts, it's probably 13.5. I would guess that he's going to be the guy. So it's going to be
precise number, 13.5. You're very,
yeah.
like you really had a model here for this.
I was trying to think it out a little bit.
You guys both get at this a little bit, and I think it's worth getting a finer point on it. This feels as though it is a QB competition, assuming they don't add someone, Sando, and I do want to come back to that. But this feels as though, Derrik, it is a QB competition in name only. The Saints are almost pot committed to Tyler Shuck being the guy this season, even if it results in, a season where they're not really competitive in the NFC South or in the NFC wildcard race at large. It just feels to me as we get into this year that it has to be Shuck, at least to start the season, given the draft capital spent on him, given what they were thrown into with Derek Carr's retirement, that it is a Shuck unless Rattler absolutely blows us away or Shuck totally falls flat on his face in the summer sort of situation.
I think that's what it is. It's unless Rattler takes some huge step or Shuck is just not nearly as mature and put together as we think that he is. And I don't mean like as a guy, I just mean like as a player. And I do think that when you spend a second round pick on a guy, and you're walking in as the new coaching staff, you definitely I think you want that guy to win the job. I think you want him to go be the guy. And I do think if Kellen Moore stepped into the job believing that Derek Carr was going to be there and was going to be the guy, and whether or not that was true, who knows, he was probably formulating the offense around that. And I do think that Tyler Shuck brings a lot more Derek Carr-like qualities to the offense and to the way that he plays than a guy like Spencer Rattler does. And so from that perspective, it might be easier for him to put it together. So I think, like you said, it's unless something pretty dramatic happens one way or the other, this should be Tyler Shuck.
All right, Sando, so let's get back to that point. The Saints, they don't like to take years off. So we know there are two big names out there. One of them is linked entirely to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kirk Cousins is the other one, of course. That one, Aaron Rodgers, I think we all know that. Is there a move to be made for the Saints? Is there something to be done? Hard to imagine the Falcons making a move, a Kirk Cousins trade in division at this point in the season. But is there something to be done where it is veteran TBD? Maybe it is a Cousins trade that surprises us, or someone else who is out there for the Saints where they are not starting Tyler Shuck.
I think it's a potential veteran later who isn't necessarily seen as a starter when they get him, but gives them something more than what they have at the position. Does that make sense? I don't think they're going to make a move to get somebody to usurp Shuck necessarily, but if there definitely could be a veteran come along who's cut or something, and gives them, and Kellen Moore likes him and he feels like, hey, you know what, if something happened to Shuck, I'd feel better with this guy than Rattler. I think that's the more likely. And as I went back and forth with the agent yesterday, I said, who would be a good candidate for them? He said, not sure, but this is a team that is in cap hell every year, but still goes for it. Just don't see them relying solely on a rookie. And that's kind of where I feel. The agent saying not sure, well, that means we don't really have a guy. You can't name who it is, but it's probably not this. I don't think this will be the exact group that they go into the season with, but I don't think it changes my opinion on Shuck being the guy. Make sense?
Can't interest anyone in Desmond Ridder, New Orleans Saints quarterback.
Oh, man. Once upon a time for me, but that storybook is closed, unfortunately.
All right, let's get to the next one here. This one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about the Cleveland Browns. We got Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shadur Sanders all in the mix here. I think we're all going to assume that Joe Flacco is the week one starter. I think we're all going to assume that more than one quarterback will start a game for the Cleveland Browns this season. So, Sando, instead of doing the week one, the late season construction that we've been talking about with these other teams, who do you think ends up starting the most games at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns this year?
It could be Flacco in like a plurality, like when you have three candidates in a race and no one gets the majority, but someone has to have the most. That could be the situation for them. I would think Flacco is going to go into the year as a starter. And look, the quarterbacks they drafted were third and fifth round. These are not like, it's not the same as taking one at the top of the second round or Jackson Dart, right? I mean, there's a reason they acquired a first-round pick for next year, too, right? It's because these are not necessarily solving the position in Dylan Gabriel and Shadur Sanders. Sure, maybe one of them does, but, I would think that Flacco would be their guy for a while. I don't necessarily see Pickett even being in the mix necessarily. They'd probably keep those other two guys. And then, I think a lot of us feel that, hey, Sanders would have had the higher grade than Gabriel, and maybe he would, get the chance. But they showed us who they liked the most. At least my perception would be that the coaching staff probably liked Gabriel more, and that, when they made the move for Sanders, which didn't make a lot of sense, that it could have been someone in the front office saying, hey, or ownership saying, hey, the value's too great. We got to take this guy. And so my guess would be that the coaching staff would go to Gabriel next. Just be my guess.
I think I agree with that. And I probably think that Flacco is going to start the most games. The reason being, one, he's going to obviously start from week 1. So there's at least some percentage chance that the offense is actually decent with him behind there. I think that's probably not going to be the case, but I do think he's at least the most mature guy. I also think, just in terms of skill set and the throws that he wants to make, he actually makes the most sense for Stefanski. Like, in my mind, when I think of the Stefanski offense, there are a lot more deep drop back, get under center, play action stuff, throw it down the field. I think he's better at that than Shedeur Sanders. I think he's better at that than Dylan Gabriel, and certainly Kenny Pickett. And so I think pretty much for that reason, I expect him to hold the job. I think when you turn to the rookies, Gabriel probably has the best skill set for some of the RPO and quick game stuff that they were doing with Deshaun Watson, which I don't know how much of that they even want to do, but I think at least, Gabriel does have that skill set in him.
This is an interesting team to look at because Robert talks about this a lot, and so I'm gonna steal this from him, right? A lot of the offensive line is going to turn over after this season, or at least potentially could turn over. Wyatt Teller, Joe Bitonio, even Pocic. These are guys who are all free agents after this season. David Njoku is a free agent after this season. They just signed Jerry Jeudy to an extension, so he will be here. But it's a team that, we are used to them being what they've been on offense, a team that we felt was well built but never was able to solve the quarterback position. And that is maybe changing after this year. They do, it seems, have an ability to make a hard reset across the board after this season, right? They made a couple of moves on offense in the draft that are not the quarterbacks, Quinshon Judkins, Harold Fannin, so guys who could be longer-term building blocks for them in the right situation where they are able to solve the quarterback situation. Sandra, do you think that is a way that is a reality for them that influences the way they go about deciding who gets the snaps at quarterback this season?
Yeah, in terms of, hey, we may be in a rebuild mode coming after this, and so go with one of these young guys at a certain point?
Yeah, whatever the answer is, I guess at the end of that, is it influenced by the realities of what their roster is right now and how much turnover could be coming from them, whether they like it or not after this season?
Yeah, I think that it could be. I mean, we saw them last year. They did not put their best quarterback in there late in the year. Would you agree with that? It was sort of
I would certainly agree with that.
Interesting move for them. Yeah, and so I think they tried to get a higher pick, and I think they've telegraphed a little bit by getting the first round pick next year. And we know when Deshaun Watson comes off the books, they took a couple flyers on quarterbacks this year, but I think they have shown more than most teams, whether you like the plan or not. It's hard to like it right now the way that it's turned out, but that seems to be a long runway thinking ahead place, doesn't it? Where they're taking into account some of those things and where they're going to be in the future. Otherwise, they would be like a lot of teams who would be like, hey, Stefanski had a losing year, he's out, right? That's why really most teams operate, and they haven't done that. They've really, to me, shown that they're thinking longer term.
They really have given Stefanski a longer leash than most losing coaches would get, and I actually love Stefanski, so I think it's been fine. He's really good. It's just when that's your quarterback situation, it's can only win so many games. The thing that I kind of was thinking about Beller is actually in my mind, because they're so forward thinking, I think it would be easy to be like, oh, just throw some of the young guys in and see if one's good. I almost wonder if they value making sure that Judkins has good reps and that Cedric Tillman, who's a young receiver, has good reps, and Jamari Thrash, who's going to play a lot for them. They drafted Harold Fannin. Like, I almost wonder if they want Joe Flacco in there more because he's at least some degree of veteran who can glue this together, where if you have all those other younger guys and then a third or fifth round rookie at quarterback, that seems like a degree of volatility that I just don't know if they're willing to take on.
All right, guys, last one here, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this one, It's a little different. Let's be honest. It's a little different than what we've been talking about with these other 4 teams. Right now, we've got Mason Rudolph and Will Howard as the top 2 quarterbacks on the unofficial depth chart. Been a lot of talk about Aaron Rodgers eventually joining this team. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We've talked about that enough. Maybe not as much as other shows have talked about it, but we've talked about it enough. Derrik, you have made the case that you want to see this team go get Kirk Cousins. We talked about that in our buy or sell off-season episode that the Steelers were part of. So if you want a little bit more on that, you can go ahead and check that out. Sando, we're going to start with you since Derrick's got to have plenty of say on this topic on this show. Instead of the construction we've been talking about here, like what's the answer for the Steelers? I mean, do they do the Rodgers thing? It certainly they've trended in that direction a little bit. Is that the best thing for this team to do this season? Are you with Derrik? Do they make the Cousins move? Do they at least pick up the phone and call Atlanta and see what the Cousins move would require? What should this team be doing?
Yeah, I might like the Cousins move more. But, just because the Rodgers fatigue is real, and I don't see the fit. I just don't see, Rodgers everywhere he's gone has had, a lot of say. I think that was an issue late in his tenure with Mike McCarthy. It was an issue, of conflict somewhat with Matt LaFleur, and they got rid of him. And then he brings all of his people into the Jets. Since when do we ever get the feeling that Aaron Rodgers is going to go in there and fit in on a system? I just don't see this as being a great fit. It looks like nothing more than a stopgap 1-year upgrade over the Mason Rudolph, but to get what? To get where? Are they really going to make a huge deep push in the AFC with Rodgers? I don't really see that at this stage. I think it just looks like a difficult situation to manage without the upside that you would hope and without any future. So to me, if Kirk Cousins were healthy, and you could get that kind of verified, that could have a little bit more appeal for the offense they want to run, fitting in with the team. And look, if he were to get healthy, maybe you get 2 years out of Kirk Cousins, and it gives you a little bit more time to line up your next guy. Whereas Rodgers, when he's there, it's all about Rodgers. Does that seem like a Pittsburgh thing? It just doesn't seem like it to me.
Sando, that is to the T how I think about all of this stuff. Like, we can do is Kirk Cousins going to be healthy? But I think at this stage in the career, I'm not sure that Aaron Rodgers is consistently going to be healthy either. And so I think that's certainly a factor. And then you mentioned it's the Aaron Rodgers system when you bring him in. And I'm with you. Like, I just struggle to see that really working with Tomlin and with Arthur Smith. That seems like a weird clash. Whereas I look at Kirk, seems like a much more, amenable guy. And especially, I think he just makes sense for Arthur Smith's offense. So I just feel like we're going to get to a point in this offseason where, I don't know, maybe it's, middle of July and the Falcons are like, all right, we'll eat a few more $1 million if the Steelers are willing to throw us a bone here. And I feel like that's where we're going to arrive.
So you think then that that Rodgers won't even be signed by then?
I don't think so. Maybe I'm like doing a little bit too much of like how I would handle the Rodgers situation, but I just can't imagine as a team, even if I'm desperate, signing 40-some-odd-year-old Aaron Rodgers who isn't already in the building by the end of May. Like, it scares me. It's just not, I'm kind of with you where I just struggle to see what is even the upside of something like that. Whereas at least with Kirk Cousins, even if you are still trying to thread a needle, right, with an older player, injury, all that stuff, I can at least see the upside, and I think it's a little bit more easy to stomach for me.
Yeah, I'd question the fit too. Everything I've heard makes it seem like it's still going to be Rodgers. So, but at a certain point here, when is that point where it just feels like it's almost too late? I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're going to go into mandatory camps and stuff as we get into June, and I think at that point, come on.
There's a question of like to what end for the Steelers also when you are looking at these guys. This is a team that we know is always going to be competitive. They've always been competitive. They've always been on the fringes, if not sneaking into the playoff picture, as they've done the last couple of seasons. And then you get into the playoffs, and it's an easy one and done. You can see that. You look back, you still look at this AFC gauntlet where you're going through, where you're going to have to go through Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Maybe the Bengals get in this year. You're talking about going through Joe Burrow as well. You got what the Texans are doing with an offense that, whether it bounces back or not, has plenty of talent on it, and then a great defense. There's a lot to get through in the AFC, and the Steelers have never been able to do that in these recent years as they've been trying to piece together the quarterback situation with a number of different guys thrown in there. Do Rodgers or Cousins change that equation for you, Sando?
I think they're better than what they have. Certainly, I don't think that they change the equation in terms of them contending, seriously contending. Like, could you win a playoff game with Aaron Rodgers? I do think you could, but it's going to be driven by the team and the defense and him managing it, right? More than the Rodgers that I think that, we were accustomed to in the past. I think he can still lead a 2-minute offense, and I would probably, in any one game or series or whatever, I'd rather have him than anyone else they've got there. But I don't think it changes the math in the AFC at all, really, with either one of those guys. Pittsburgh has just been so casual about the quarterback situation. Really, you can say going back a lot of years, they had Ben Roethlisberger, but before that, they were always content to just sort of ride with the guy, Neil O'Donnell's of the world and whatnot. So when you have 21 consecutive non-losing seasons, I think it's real easy. And you have 3 coaches in 55 years. I think it's real easy to, is the word complacent come in at a certain point in time? Like, who else would take this approach to the quarterback position this casually? Right?
Probably
teams are like,
no
shoot,
one.
we got to get Jackson Dart.
I was going to say,
Chuck.
Yeah, usually teams are too far on the opposite, where they're too flippant to take guys and take chances that don't deserve to be taken as high, or, in free agency, maybe don't deserve as much money as they should. Whereas the Steelers are the opposite. They're like, we'll figure it out. And I understand. I get why they think that, because I think at a lot of other positions they have been able to do that for a long time. Like, they can just kind of make something out of nothing. But this is kind of the one position where that doesn't really work. And I do think they need to be a little bit more aggressive. So I'm probably with you that neither of these guys really changed their ability to contend. But I think if both of them are just going to be, if we win a playoff game, it has to be them managing the offense and all this stuff, yada, yada. I would just rather have Kirk for that. Like, I just think he does it better at this stage in his career. And I think, again, he's just a little bit of an easier guy to have around.
Okay, so not a week 1 battle, but let's start with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, obviously, this is not going to be any question about who is starting there. Sam Darnold will be the starter in Seattle, but it is worth considering that they went out, they brought back Drew Lock to be the backup there. They used a 3rd-round pick on Jalen Milroe, so there is something there where it's like, yeah, Sam's our guy, but if and when they've got some things that they could do. So, Derek, what are you looking at when you think about Seattle's quarterback situation as we get toward the start of the season?
Yeah, so I understand that I am a little bit more on the not believing in Sam Darnold side of a lot of this, or really just not believing in the Seahawks offense in general. But I do think almost no matter what, he is at least going to be the starter for the first, 10 weeks. Like, even if it's like kind of a train wreck or kind of what it was in Carolina, I think he'll still be the guy for at least 10 weeks. And I also think it does bring in a complication of, like, the defense might be so good that even if the offense isn't that good, that they'll still just keep the quarterback in there because they're actually winning enough games anyway. So I do think that that's part of it. But I think because they drafted Milroe, and because when you look at the Sam Darnold contract, it's really more of a deal that they can get out of after the first year, I just wonder if there's a percentage chance that maybe Milroe is 15% more ready than we thought he was going to be. And, maybe the Seahawks are sitting at 5-5 halfway through the year. They have the 25th best offense in the league because things haven't coalesced. Is there just a chance that they think Milroe is the guy who can give them a little bit of a boost? So again, I think that's like a far out possibility, but it's just, something that I think I'm keeping in mind, especially with, I do think some of the rollout stuff that they're going to want to do in this offense makes sense for Jalen Milroe. So it's, again, I understand I have a lot more skepticism heading into the Darnold thing and heading into this, but I just think it's at least something to keep the radar on.
Yep. They're totally relying on their system and running the ball more to help their offensive line. And now they drafted an offensive lineman in the first round too, but and make it easier on the quarterback and not ask them to do what they asked Geno Smith to do, which was 70-some%, top 10 in the league for shotgun rates. Their passing rate on early downs when tied or leading was really high, one of the highest in the league. And I think with the defensive coach, they really want to, put the reins on it a little bit. And I think from that standpoint, I like the change to Kubiak. I think Kubiak does help align the philosophy of the head coach, Mike McDonald, with the offensive coordinator. I think that's going to be good for them. I think it will be good and easier for the offensive line. I think it'll be good for Kenneth Walker. You can see him kind of becoming a little bit more decisive, maybe a one-cut runner. I think he could have a good year. So I think that in some ways they, on paper, maybe have less talent on offense, right? Trading DK Metcalf, depending on what you think of Geno Smith versus Sam Darnold, who I think you have to at least admit Darnold is more volatile. You know what you're going to get from Geno, and it's pretty good. You hope it's good with Darnold, but it might be bad. There's a better chance of that. So I think that Milroe becomes, to me, really interesting as a potential starter after this year. I think that is a possibility. I think that's an interesting question to ask people, even in the league. Hey, Darnold starts this year. He probably is a starter. Milroe's probably not ready to take over, but they're going to play Milroe. They're going to have him in there. And he seems to really be put together kind of mentally, emotionally, just psychologically, right? So I think it's interesting. And I think he is a factor for them. Probably not this year as a starter, but I think he's in the picture.
I'm glad you bring that up with Milroe, though, is because, none of us actually know these guys, but it just seems like everything that people say about Milroe is they just love the guy. They love how hard he works. And there is at least part of me that wonders, like, okay, once he gets to the NFL and gets in like a relatively put together system with Kubiak, maybe he just takes to it better than he did at some of the stuff that they were doing at Alabama. And so, again, all of what I'm saying with Milroe starting at some point this year is definitely a far out thing. I don't think it's going to happen, but because I think he's just so talented and I'm more skeptical of what they're starting with week one, it's at least like in the back of my mind.
The New York Jets, the next team we're going to talk about here. This team, of course, guaranteed Justin Fields $30 million in the offseason. It's a 2-year deal. Tyrod Taylor, however, is among the league's most capable backups. That's something that we talk about a lot with him. We've talked about it in multiple stops. So, Sando, as we head in this direction that we're going, what are you thinking about with the New York Jets quarterback situation?
I was surprised they paid Justin Fields what they paid him. He wasn't on my radar as someone who was going to get that kind of money. But to me, that's a pretty hefty commitment. I think the commitment is to a style of play. I think it's a style of play that Fields can run and Tyrod Taylor can't, frankly. I think they're going to be a team with Aaron Glenn that wants to win with, defense and a quarterback run game probably that suits Justin Fields. So that commitment to me financially says that Fields is going to be their guy. I know that he lost his job at a certain point last year, but the Steelers weren't in on him to the same degree. They weren't committed to him in the same way. So I don't know if Tyrod Taylor is a shiny enough object at this point for me, if I'm them, to want to go to him unless Fields is terrible, which is a possibility. He really, he hasn't proven himself over the course of a whole season to be a good passer, but I would think they've got to have a plan for him to run the offense that only he can run.
That's kind of where my head is at, and I think because Aaron Glenn is coming from the stop that he's coming from in Detroit, and I'm not saying the Jets are going to build up the team the way that Detroit did and have this run or anything like that, but I think he at least saw what it looks like to have some patience in terms of team building and understand how to put this thing together. And I think them making the financial commitment to Fields and just say and trying to take some of the mental pressure off of Fields of, hey, you're fighting for your job, or when he was in Chicago, it was, hey, you're kind of fighting for the coaching staff's job because all the weird in terms of who was getting drafted when with the head coach's timeline there. So I think him having a slightly higher degree of stability here with what he's getting in the starting job and with the Jets, I think is honestly nice. And so I like Tyrod Taylor. If he has to start a few games this year, I'm sure he'll be fine. But I kind of agree with you, Mike. I think they went out to get Fields specifically because they wanted to run the offense a certain way, which was use his legs a little bit, run the ball a lot. We're going to throw the ball 24 times a game because we have one good pass catcher, hopefully two. Maybe Mason Taylor really gives you something, but they've got more good running backs than they have good pass catchers. And you add Justin Fields on top of that, this is definitely a team that's going to want to run the ball. And I know the Jets defense was not great last year, but I think that was a lot of there was a mutiny once they fired Robert Saleh. Mm-hmm. I trust Aaron Glenn's ability to get them back to playing to at least a top 10 level again. So you add that on top of the way that they're going to run the ball. it's at least an interesting situation to keep an eye on. But I'm looking forward to 17 games of Justin Fields.
Yeah, I am with Tyrod Taylor too. I wonder if he started 5 games in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. I remember joking with Trent Dilfer about this. Like, there's a certain point in your career when you can be a backup forever till you have to play, and then you get found out. Like, Tyrod Taylor is going to be 36 in August. Like, I just don't know if he's the Tyrod Taylor that we were thinking about. Really, he hasn't been a starter since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the last time he was in 2021 with the Texans, but he got hurt and missed like 6 weeks and then never won the job back from, I think that was the Davis Mills year.
And he was 2-4 as a starter with 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and completed 60% of his passes. So I don't know what type of an option he is for more than a couple games.
Let's move this along to the Minnesota Vikings. We know J.J. McCarthy is going to be the starter for this team. Sam Howell in as the backup. Derek, everyone agrees this is one of the best infrastructures offensively in the league. This is probably one of the best rosters top to bottom offensively and defensively in the league. This was a 14-win team a season ago. Flame out in the playoffs, but still a 14-win season and an earned 14 wins. This was a team that was this close to having home field advantage in the NFC going into the playoffs, and then a week later their season is over. So what are you looking at with this quarterback situation going into the start of the year?
Yeah, with the environment, I think if you dropped any of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, however you want to dice them up, they would all win the MVP in this offense. Like, I really think it's going to be, especially going into this year where the offensive line, I think, is going to be even better, especially along the interior. The thing that I find fascinating about this quarterback situation is, like you said, I think at this point, it's pretty clearly going to be J.J. McCarthy. I just feel like the vibes around the whole J.J. McCarthy thing are a little bit weird for a guy they clearly spent so much draft capital to get. One, because they were toying around with the Aaron Rodgers thing, I think, for a little bit. They were at least flirting with it. I don't know how serious the interest was, but it was a little bit weird to me that they didn't immediately slam the door when that was on the table, and so I thought that was interesting. They obviously then trade for Sam Howell, who I don't think is a better quarterback than J.J. McCarthy, but with how obsessed Kevin O'Connell seems to be with reviving quarterbacks' careers, I find that one, the Sam Howell trade, mildly interesting. And then the last thing to me is, with J.J. McCarthy, we're getting a guy who never had that much of the burden of the offense on him in college, and obviously he made some good throws and some good plays and had some potential, but was never a super high-volume guy, and to me was always going to take time to really become a good player. And now he's coming off of a knee injury, in which during his recovery apparently lost 20 pounds. And obviously he's a pro athlete. He can put that weight on. But that's just a weird and crazy fluctuation for a guy who was already on the skinnier side for quarterbacks. So I just feel like there's a lot of weird going on with this entire quarterback room.
Yeah. When I used to do the Football GM podcast with Randy Mueller, Randy used to have this saying, there's something I don't know, the knowing of which changes everything. And so I feel like there's something there that we don't fully know about that led to some of the ambiguity and some of the hedging this offseason. And that would make it make a little bit more sense, just the vibe and the feeling. Now, I do think that there's natural concerns about, hey, you've got this playoff-ready roster, and this guy, J.J. McCarthy, who you were super excited about, barely lasted a preseason game. Right, and is unproven, and hasn't been able to practice a ton. And so, as a coach, as an organization, you have to really be sure when you have this type of a roster that, hey, the whole team's buying in, that we're ready to go. And so, I could see some hesitation, doing that. Not enough to say we're going to re-sign Sam Darnold, because you had questions about him too. Like, Darnold wasn't good enough or the answer enough to like come off of J.J. McCarthy and sign him to a big deal. I get not doing that, but there's kind of a little bit of a no man's land here too, where is J.J. McCarthy fully ready to take the reins? He hasn't been able to prove that. We have some questions about him. Maybe they have a couple questions that they didn't have before, physically or whatever. They've been around him, just readiness. Not everybody's ready right away. Maybe he's not as ready as they thought. So I don't think Sam Howell changes that equation. I don't think they're sitting there going, ooh, we're going to play Sam Howell. But I do think they needed to have somebody who has played before, and who hopefully Kevin O'Connell liked and saw something in. And, maybe that's Howell. I'm sure that J.J. McCarthy, unless he's hurt, is going to be the starting quarterback. But am I willing to bet, that he's going to start the whole year for whatever reason? I don't think he's proven that.
That's a good point, though, about them being kind of like a weird middle ground. Like, let's say last year, instead of 14 games, they won 9 or 10 and were a decent team, but probably didn't feel that they were that close. Maybe we're just not talking about any of this because we're just like, oh, well, yeah, it's fine that they're going to start J.J. McCarthy because they're clearly still a couple of steps away. But because how good last year was, I was even in the camp that I was like, I would try to keep Sam Darnold around. And obviously, I think maybe the number went a little bit higher than they were willing to go. But kind of for the same thing that you're talking about, Sando, like with how good the roster was, you would kind of want somebody who's done this before. And so maybe that's really all their hang up is they still believe in McCarthy, but maybe they believe in McCarthy for year 3 and year 4. And this year, when they feel they're so close, maybe they're just a little bit scared.
It's a weird situation to be in when you win way more games than people thought, So I think it wasn't as easy and straightforward as it should be just based on the fact that you drafted this guy so early and they like him.
Last one here, guys. It is the Miami Dolphins. Now, this is a unique one, even as we got into these not a week 1 battle discussions, because, this is, obviously hot seat Mike McDaniel, obviously hot seat Chris Grier. You've got Tua Tagovailoa here who, they could move on from potentially after this year, depending on the way things go. But this is also a team that if Tua doesn't get hurt last year, or if they have a capable backup last year, maybe they're a playoff team. They went 6-5 with Tua as their starter. They went 1-1 to start the season. He gets hurt in that week 2 game against Buffalo. Then they go 1-3 without him. They lose to Seattle. They lose to Tennessee. They beat New England. They lose to Indy. He comes back. They lose heartbreaker at the gun games to Arizona and Buffalo. In Buffalo, a 61-yard field goal by Tyler Bass, if you remember, for the Bills to win that game. So those are 2 quality teams that they are right there with Tua back in the lineup. Then their season goes the way it does, and they ultimately go 8-9, Tua not starting the last 2 weeks of the season. But a team that probably right on the fringes of playoff quality last year with Tua healthy. Maybe they're there again this season. Now Zach Wilson is the backup there, Sando. So a more capable backup at the very least, I would say, this year than they had last year. Your assessment of the Miami Dolphins quarterback situation as we, get ready for the 2025 season.
Yeah, if you look at the games Tua started last year, you said 6-5. They averaged 2.5 touchdowns per game on offense. Their EPA per play would rank somewhere around 14th. Okay, and that includes a game he started and didn't finish, where they were probably pretty bad, right? Without him, they're 1.2 touchdowns per game on offense, so half. And by far, they would be number 32 on offense, by far, 32 in EPA per play. So I do like the fact that they got Zach Wilson. Look, I wouldn't want to have to bet on him for the whole year, but I think that's at least an intriguing player. Now, good system probably. I think the thing with Zach Wilson is he does have some traits, I think, from college that could be somewhat similar to Tua. I don't know that he's been asked to use them with the quick passing game and that sort of a thing. So I'm intrigued by it. I feel better about it than I would with what they had last season. But I think they're so all in on Tua that if it doesn't go well with Tua, that's really bad for everybody.
That's kind of how I'm more seeing it. I do think that Wilson would give them slightly better backup play than they got last year. And so instead of going 1-3, maybe they just split them, and you are alive at the end of the year to be a playoff team. I remember for as much as we did like, the Bengals are alive, late in the season, the Dolphins actually had the advantage over them in the playoff race for a majority of the year until Tua missed those last 2 games. So I think all that's a really good point. For me, the interesting part is like Tua has a history of getting banged up and missing these games. Again, there were multiple stretches last year where he missed. The only season where he's played all 17 or 16 games, whatever it was 2023. And if we remember, that was the year where he actually kind of bulked up a lot and he got a little bit heavier. Last year, he actually lost a lot of the weight to be a better scrambler, which he was, by the way. It was the best he's ever scrambled in his career. He was actually pretty creative outside of the pocket in a way he had never been in the NFL, but it kind of came at the cost again of him getting a little bit more banged up. And so I just wonder if that's the case again this year. And let's say kind of similar to this past year where he misses maybe 6 games, they go 8-9, just miss the playoffs, or maybe 9-8 even. What do the Dolphins do next year? And that kind of becomes the question for me, is like, are they willing to move on from him? Because I think in that scenario, if they are willing to move on from Mike McDaniel, because Tua has only ever really worked well under Mike McDaniel, I wonder if at that point they would just also be willing to move on from Tua Tagovailoa and kind of scrap the whole thing, especially because, Tyreek Hill would be getting older. Like, it would feel like such a natural break point if this doesn't work the way that they want it to this year.
I guess that is going to do it for this episode of the Athletic Football Show. Thanks so much, listeners, for letting me in with Robert on vacation. It's a lot of fun getting back on the mic. Big thanks, as always, of course, to Derrik Klassen and Mike Sando. We will be back next week. We've got a mailbag episode coming for you on Monday. You will hear Robert's voice on that one. It's one we recorded before he went on vacation. And then we'll have 2 more episodes to follow next week after that. But that's going to do it for the Athletic Football Show, both for this episode and for this week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.